Braxcast time once again. This is the 25th episode of the Braxcast, and uh, it's going to be a little bit more of a deep dive. We're going to go audit Gooding services, but before we audit Gooding services, we are going to go over the second issue of the Rippazine, Rippazine number 2. The final print numbers have been revealed for the limited copies, so the collectors is going to be limited to 1,400 copies. The standard CGC is going to be 600, along with the collector CGC. This is the first appearance of the character Saoirse, who people are responding really well to. This fiery, feisty redhead femme fatale. People absolutely love that. I do as well. I've got a thing for redheads and blondes, so this is why I'm a huge fan of the Rippaverse. Even more so now of the reveal of Saoirse. Her getting that 16-page story in the Rippazine, and of course it still firing on all cylinders. And if you want more insight into the creative process of the Rippazine, I highly recommend checking out the last episode of the Braxcast, because I interviewed the executive editor of the Rippazine. I think he gave some great insight into their mindset with the Rippazine. So be sure to check that out. It was really good, really great, and I think they want to make this a quarterly release. That's what he was talking about. That's what they were, that's what he said to me when I asked him about that. He's like, I don't want to bite off more than they can chew, but I definitely think they can do it, and I definitely think there's a market for the Rippazine, considering the second issue is made over $100,000, with the base version just being $7. Is a really fantastic thing. The fans really like the Rippazine because it's made for the fans by people who want the fan base to be alive and well. So I'm really excited to get this sometime mid-September, but I can't really say anything more about the Rippazine or the second issue of the Rippazine until I get it in my hands and I can really sink my teeth into it. But until then, what we are going to do, like I said, is audit Gooding services. So Gooding, the Polymath, came out. Most people I've seen, really enjoying it. Think it's a great book. I do as well. I gave a pretty positive review when I reviewed it. If you want to check out my review, highly recommend it. It's on Substack in written form. It's on YouTube. All the other video platforms I post to. If you want to check that out. But there are of course some people who did not respond to this book as positively as I did, and I figured instead of replying to all the comments saying everything I thought about the book, I want to dedicate this episode, the 25th episode of the Braxcast, to addressing what went wrong, quote unquote, in this book. And here is your final warning. Spoiler alert for this book, Getting the Polymath. So if you're interested in this book and you do not want to be spoiled, stop watching now, because this episode is going to be all about going into the brass tacks, the nuts and bolts of this book, which of course is going to necessitate me talking about spoilers. So we are going to go right into that with that given. So there are some, I think, errors. So Mike Barron has this little essay at the beginning of the book. I believe every single Rippaverse book has had something similar to this. They usually appear at the end, but this one shows up at the beginning of Mike Barron's mindset of writing this book. I think it's very interesting, but Gooding is spelt wrong. It's the same error that showed up in Iceland number 2, where it's good dying instead of Gooding. So a very minor thing, but when you have a company that sold 150,000 copies in 2 years, $10 million of revenue, you want to be able to put this under a microscope and have everything be correct, at least grammatically, at least in terms of syntax. So that's definitely something that they need to tighten up, is copy editing a little bit. But does this make the book irredeemably awful? I definitely do not think so. And then I guess we're going to go on to the next thing. We'll go with errors, or stuff that I think is, or stuff that was pointed out to me, saying well, why didn't you address the repeating panels of the book? And I definitely don't think that's an error. So there's a couple of scenes like this. So you've got a repeating panel here, and then it repeats there, and then you've got a couple more. So you've got these repeating panels here, if you can see them. And then when Gina and Gooding are in college, Gina being Gooding's future wife, high school sweetheart, you would say, they had, if you can see, there's some repeating panels right here, basically. But this just establishes the monotony of the story. in sort of the beginning, where it's Gooding's childhood and early young adulthood, and there's a lot of monotony to that. It helps set tone. So I never really thought those repeating panels were being used as a way to pad out the pages, more or less used as a way to convey the story to the reader, and I think it did a really good job of that. So that's why I didn't say the repeating panels were in that story and made it made it bad, quote unquote. And then the other thing is that I have seen people go on about stuff like, if you see here, see if I can show you. You've got the in the background, the statues is a statue of Abraham Lincoln. So people are using that, and there's a painting of Gooding's. See if I can find it here. Yes, here we go. This painting right here in Gooding's office. The tongue is colored here. It's not colored there. It could be the light from that hitting it in a slightly different direction, or a very minor error or something like that, and saying, well, this is stolen, and this is 3D assets, so this whole book was traced and not made legitimately. However, a comic book is supposed to be made legitimately, and if you want someone to go over every single page and break it down by artistically going over every single drawing convention or artistic convention that's ever existed, I am not your guy for that. Again, I have aspirations to do art, to draw. I do draw every day. I'm definitely far away from being able to produce stuff like this, right? But I'm not going to read these books and look for every minute little thing. I read these books like the average person. I get them in my hands. I'm always very excited to read the next Rippaverse book because I'm really invested in this universe, right? So that does bias me a little bit, but I go from the average comic book reader. So I read it, have a good average experience or a bad one, and then I convey that to the reader or the watcher when the review that I do. So I don't really notice these statues or stuff like that. To me, if you take a statue of Abraham Lincoln, you just trace it in the background, it's not that big of a deal to me. It helps set the scene, right? And it all looks really good to me. So I look at the art and I like how it looks. And again, if you don't like how it looks, or you think that statue of Abraham Lincoln or that art being used is beyond the pale or egregious, that's all well and good, but it is not to me, and I do not think it is that for the average person. So that's basically the biggest things I saw floating around with the art. And again, I'm not going to go over every single page and say, well, this isn't made with 3D assets, or this isn't done like that, because I don't think there's much of a point to. And again, there are people who are convinced that everything the Rippaverse does is irredeemably awful. And if you want to think that, that's absolutely fine, but I cannot convince you otherwise, and I'm not going to waste my time doing that. Specifically, what I want to go is just over the criticisms I've seen of this book, basically address why I think they're either valid or I think they're a little bit misguided. So the biggest thing I would see is this idea that Gooding is a Gary Stu, right? So a Mary Sue is basically a character that has no conflict in their character arc, or if it does, it's resolved perfectly. They're always on top. There's no meaningful character development. They don't really have a character arc. It's more of a straight line. Rey from Star Wars is a very good example. She doesn't really train or go through as many trials and tribulations as Luke Skywalker does, so her story doesn't feel nearly as meaningful, because she just gets the lightsaber and she's just able to use it as well as a master and go toe-to-toe with Kylo Ren, someone who's trained for years, right? I don't think that Gooding is like that. I think Gooding has some trials and tribulations. I think he's a generic whiz-kid type of character, and again, there are only 8 stories you can possibly tell, and every other story is a variation of that. So if you're going to say something's contrived or something's generic, you can only make things as unique as possible. But I think the first thing, right, you have this thing with Gooding having to use tacks. He puts them under his shirt, right, and he's able to get Ron Hodges to stop physically bullying him, because he punches him and his hand bleeds, and it's later revealed that he gave him tetanus over that because he did that. And then another thing is people saying well, was Gooding a hero because of this, or this isn't a heroic thing to do? Gooding is not a hero at this point. He never really is. hero. I definitely think he has a moral code, but not every character in the Rippaverse is a hero, or two, even needs to be a hero. So I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, or not necessarily like a bad thing if a character doesn't do something that's heroic. I think Gooding doing this is him using his brains to conquer the brawn that he's dealing with, right? And then, of course, you have the development of the fact that he gets a full ride to college, right, with this company, but this company steals his intellectual property, forces him to do things that he'd rather not be doing, right? And it's also shown that in that scene, him building, I think it's like some sort of nuclear reactor, was a little bit beyond his purview, and then that gets him basically into trouble when he refuses to do it, and he eventually just gets sacked. And then there's the the fact of the matter with the final fight scene, right? Him being able to conquer Ron Hodges physically. You see that he does go into combat training, right? He's exercising, right? And Gina's saying, I don't know why you don't just swim. We have a pool. He says combat fascinates all men. If I'm going to exercise, I may as well learn something useful. Again, the implication here is that this isn't the first time that Gooding was training in combat, right? He had someone he was training with. He has all this workout equipment, or at least access to it, right? So he was physically training himself to be adept at combat. And when you see this later scene, right, this final fight scene between Ron Hodges and Isom, where he's not Ron Hodges and Isom, Ron Hodges and Gooding, excuse me, he does do this wall bounce like Isom did, and Isom #1 against Santwan. And I guess that was someone saying like, well, that's something that Isom did, so he has like the same power. No, he was just forced back, and then he was able to redirect that momentum, and then he threw a knife, has a has him basically gas him, and then he tranks him, which shows that Gooding has a very strong moral code against killing, right? So Ron Hodges is someone who bullied him in high school, so there's this natural grudge you would have against him. He's a dishonorably discharged military dishonorably discharged criminal soldier who broke out. So he's also a fugitive, and he's also doing crimes, literally killing people. He killed an employee of his, but he still doesn't kill him. So it shows that Gooding has a moral code. So he's just not going to kill willy-nilly. So that's definitely a very interesting thing, and this is part of the characterization. It does help build out the world a little bit, showing that you've got characters like this. You've got the fact of the matter is that you've got really subtle stuff like talking about Brian Solari's exceptionals have sent the invaders packing. So you're talking about the Great War of Separation, right? The fact that it wasn't just purely defensive on the side of Texas. You've got Ron Hodges being expelled from the great state of Texas's military, showing the fact that you've got the Texas military and these interactions between them. So the world building, it's very subtle, it's very small. And again, I think what people want is to be able to go onto the Rippaverse wiki and just read like, a book's worth of the entire timeline, right? Knowing every single thing that goes on in the timeline. But that's not really what I personally want. I don't think it's what a lot of people who are invested in the universe, in the Rippaverse as a comic book universe, you want to get these books and find about it slowly over time. That's the whole part of the intrigue, right? When I read Invincible, I read all 25 of the trades. And I got into it after the fact, but the story unfolds over time, right? It's this complete story that unfolds over time. This is the same thing with the Rippaverse. Every book makes the world feel a little bit more lived in, and you get more understanding of what the Rippaverse's timeline, what his continuity is, especially as he's getting established. We've only had the Rippaverse around for 2 years, and I think there are some people who want it to already be at the point where you've got like 60, 80 years of canon, like where Marvel and DC are at. And that's just not going to happen overnight. So I think that's definitely one thing. And again, this book is really short. It does have really fast pacing. So a lot of these things could have been explored more if this was 20 pages longer, and dive deeper into characterizing Gooding more, going a little bit over more of Ron Hodges and his military escapades. I could definitely go and give more like context to the Great War of Separation, and the military state of the United States in terms of, like, is there active war, who are the belligerents, and all those sorts of things. But I think for what this is, being an origin story for not only Cato Gooding but Splatterpuss, which people, that's Ron Hodges, that's his name when he does become a villain, right? People don't like that name. Or some people don't like that name. People also don't like the fact that their birth dates are censored on this panel, which I thought it really gave that clandestine military vibe. When you would play Black Ops, the mission information would get censored to really make it feel like you're like a spec op or a special operator or something like that. Like everything you're doing is actually getting classified by the CIA in real time. I think that was the vibe they were going for, and I think it went really well. And that, of course, some people thought that missed the mark, but I don't think that was something that I'm going to go and say, well, this is bad, it ruins my reading experience. If I thought it actually enhanced it. Like, it adds this air of mystery. So if you don't know something about somebody, like their birthday, and then it's like, oh, well, it makes it more like secretive, like this information is being hidden. It makes them inherently more interesting. At least that's my opinion on that there. So that's really the way that I view Gooding the Polymath. And then, another thing, just mentioning right here, is that Gooding invents the bass jammer. It's like, well, Eric July wouldn't have liked something like the bass jammer, so it doesn't make any sense. These characters aren't meant to be self-inserts or affirm Eric July, the founder of the Reverse's, personal politics, right? Alpha Core is, the superhero cops, basically. And, Eric July is an anarcho-capitalist. He's not someone who's going to be kind to the police or want the police to be like that, but making a story about superpowered law enforcement is really interesting. That's why Alpha Core made $1.3 million. That's why I like it. And especially, I'm an ANCAP as well, but I like the story of Alpha Core because, the state being in fiction, in media, since the state has existed since the dawn of human civilization, stories are going to cover it. I think it's an interesting thing to do. So I don't think that when stuff is getting conceptualized or things are being written, it's not being in mind of, well, would Eric July's personal politics personally agree with it? And I think that's a really dumb thing to think that everything has to be conforming to Eric July's personal brand of anarcho-capitalism. So that's, another thing that I saw floating around. And again, I definitely don't think that Gooding is a Gary Stu. I think, like all of the aspects of this book, we're talking about Ron Hodges, we're talking about Gooding himself, his relationship with Gina, talking about some of the world building. If this had 20 more pages, we could have really dived deep and really built this out a little bit more. That's what Mike Barron could have done. But, there's only, so much time, or there's only so much, you can do when you are on a release schedule one. And there's also the fact that Mike Barron could have been like, well, this is the story that I want to tell, and I'm telling it like this. And since, Mike Barron's a bit of a legend, they just went with it. And I think, like I said, the story here is really good. I think to really make this book the book that it was meant to be, or not meant to be, or to really delve into all of the plot points that get introduced into this book, making 2 more issues around the length of this would really allow them to develop everything. Because one of the most interesting things with Gooding is Gooding services, right? Especially operating in Shadow Valley, and that was mentioned in the Gooding trailer. And this being an origin story, it really ends with Gooding services. In the founding of that, and the fact that he was going to put out fires for free in the city of Forest Park. Again, is he able to do that in Shadow Valley? Does he run this fact that he can't afford to be the firefighter service for free, so he starts charging packages and offering other services because people in Shadow Valley come up to him saying, hey, we have a need for people to do fires, but we also need like EMS services. We also need investigation because people steal, grain from my silo, or, I've got fences that are broken. I want to know why. And then Gooding starts offering these services to help, people, because he finds this demand for one, and he also has this economic need to keep the lights on, right? So there is that as well. And again, none of that really gets explained or established in this book. It just is the origin of how Gooding got onto the path towards doing that. And that's, something that I think is a little bit of a missed opportunity that could be expanded upon and explained if there were 2 sequels to this book. And again, this was a free issue miniseries. I think that would be the best thing. I definitely think, even with the fact that this isn't the deepest dive into Gooding as a character, that there is definitely enough interest for that to be the case, that people want more Gooding. I've seen people wanting this book to be like a full, Gooding to be a full-on ongoing series like Isom and Alpha Core are, and I think Bloodroof is, because Bloodroof is has been presented as Bloodroof #1, so I'm assuming that's an ongoing series. But I don't think that Gooding needs to be an ongoing series, and I don't think that we need to make every single book or every single character have an ongoing series. I think Gooding having a really solid free issue miniseries that establishes him from the beginning, his childhood, getting up to how he is when he appears in Isom #2 would be a really fantastic thing, and I think it would give a lot of insight into the Rippaverse as well, and also the City of Forest Park. But I think Horseman's going to do that as well, so I'm really excited for Horseman. Again, this is, a comic book universe, so, every single book built out the universe, so when stuff gets introduced in a one-shot, even if, we never have another Gooding book again, Splatterpuss can appear in Alpha Core, he can appear in Yaira, he can appear in Isom, so the fact that we know his origin and we know his powers, and again, the way he gets his powers, the fact that it's, experimentation that was meant on other people that gets shot onto him, basically, is all really interesting. It shows the fact that people aren't just born with their powers, they can be given their powers as well. It's sort of like how Captain America got his powers through medical experimentation as well. So again, that's another really subtle world building. Again, this isn't like expository world building where you have like this wall of text at the beginning of a Star Wars movie that explains that the Empire abducted the Princess of Alderaan, or taking her to Darth Vader or something like that. It's really subtle and implied, and that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but it is for me, and it is for a decent amount of people. So hopefully, if you watched my review and you had problems with it, you get some insight into my mind. So like I said, I don't go and nitpick or pick through every little page and panel to try and find all the problems with it. I read it, in like a 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the length, especially for a comic book, and then I just give my thoughts on it as accurately as possible, and that's really what a review is supposed to be. It's not meant to be, overly. I don't think it's meant to be overly explaining or nitpicking through everything. And again, it's not like you can't, criticize or have problems with something. It's just that are these criticisms going to be something that the average person is going to even notice, and two, if they do notice it, is it going to detract from the reading experience? And I think, a lot of stuff with like stuff in the background or minor spelling errors, those really aren't things that the average person is going to even notice. And even if they do notice it, most people are going to care because, like I said before, this book is fantastic in terms of how it looks, in terms of how it reads. I think it's a really good book. So if you are interested in Gooding, I definitely would recommend picking it up. It's its own complete story. You don't need to get any other Rippaverse book to understand this book. So I definitely think it's a good book. But like I said, it could dive deep and develop things a little bit more. So making Gooding a mini series, I think, would really, allow Mike Baron to really fully explain and dive deep into everything that this book sets up. But hopefully, with that, you enjoyed this episode of the Braxcast. Definitely a little bit of disorganized audit of Gooding services, but hopefully you enjoyed it nonetheless. Like I said, hopefully you have some insight into my review process and why I talked about Gooding the way that I did. Joker is out. Thank you for tuning in to the Braxcast. Be sure to like, comment, follow, and subscribe to keep up with the Rippaverse.